Thank you. It's great to see such a crowd. I'm going to give you a little bit of a history of the railway because that's really the important part. And can you hear what I'm saying?
No. Well, of course, with the mic there, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Hearing is not that. Limited.
Anyway, there's a few folks I'd like to thank, like Lynn and
I forgot to mention you're my cousin. We're cousins.
yes, we are cousins.
Yes.
And Ed Coleman, who was the guy that really got this thing underway because I was happened to be by accident in this little museum last summer, and there was some things about.
Still can't hear you. Eric, can you turn up the volume? Or
You have to be close.
This.
is that better?
So anyway, I'm talking to Ed and looking at some photos of railway machinery and some of the North Mountain Railway stuff, and so he asked me if I'd be willing to give a little talk about the North Mountain Railway. So it ran right through our farm, and my very earliest memory of seeing the locomotive and the train was the North Mountain train, and it was in November of 1946, I'm quite sure, because it was we had just moved into our new house, which wasn't finished yet, and there was a delay with the train for some reason, and it had a passenger car on and a couple of freight cars and a caboose and whatnot, and my mother got me up so I could see it going through just at dusk in November. And it was snow on the ground. You could look through the trees and across the meadow and see it going across the meadow and the culvert there, and chuffing up through with the steam flying and lights on in the cars and stuff. And that was my first memory of seeing a train. I actually have an earlier memory of traveling on a train, but very, very little about that. I really got to meet my father when he returned from over in Europe after the war. So anyway, that sort of was always been fascinated by steam trains and steam engines and how complicated they are and what interesting, sort of almost like a living machine or being almost, because they are. You can see a diesel locomotive going that's pretty bland compared to the steam engine. And one of the other memories I have of that really spectacular memory of steam train was one time after we had a snowstorm, and I was going to school in Woodville, and we'd had a big snowstorm the night before, and so there was a sort of a layer of snow with a layer of crust because it had rain on top of the snow, and it froze on top, so you had this crust on the top of the snow, and it was about up to here. Up to my knees. When you're a little kid and it's up to your knees, it's only deep. But so I was walking off to school and by myself and tramping along, so I had to go over a mile and a half to get there. And I'd been gone close to a mile, and I heard Lynn's father, who was one of the trustees of the school board, and calling my name, and I turned around and he said, "Gerard, you can go back home." He said, "School's closed for the day." So, bright, shiny day, so I turned around and tramped into this crunchy snow, just a struggle, and the wind blowing right in my face. And I could hear the steam engine puffing away down in Woodville at the warehouses and stuff down there. And they came chugging up along as I was walking toward it, and this beautiful, bright, shiny day with this sparkling snow, and we had a V-shaped plow with a little platform on the top, a little cab where a guy could sit and see where they were going, I guess. So they were driving along at a pretty good speed, but not fast, because they never traveled very fast on that line. And the snow was going up and hitting this platform on the bottom and sliding out like this across the crust on the top. And the steam flying out of the smokestack and out of the engine everywhere, and they blew the whistle, of course. It was a great gout of steam flew up in the air, and it was just the most amazing and wonderful sight to see, which nobody will see again, probably, unless you happen to be somewhere where they're running steam locomotives nowadays, and it's in the winter time. But, that was one of the first, one of the probably most spectacular memory of the steam locomotive. But the history of that line is kind of interesting too, because the first spur line that came off the line here in Kentville was run out to Kingsport in I think it was in the late 1800s. I think it was early 1900s. Yeah. Anyway, the farmers and other business people wanted to have a line run out there because they had all the stuff to, take it right out to the land on the wharf out there and load ships and stuff, and also run things to Halifax easier. And so that was the first one, and then quite a few years later, in 1902, they started the effort to set up a line that ran out to along through under the North Mountain, where a lot of apples were and a lot of farms were and so on. And so one of the big things was the apple industry in both cases. So like the actual start of that line was in 1912, I think, or something like that, and it finished it in 1914. And so it was really important. I've got some pictures I'm supposed to show you. All right, this is the, if you read that, it's, this is the municipality of the County of King's special session. So they had a special session to rearrange the cursor here a little bit. Sorry. Yeah, so they were setting up to establish this line. This is in February of 1910, and the municipality put quite a lot of money into it and bought the right of way for the line, and it was about 100 feet wide and 14 and a half miles long, or something like that, from Centerville, because that's where the Y is to join the two trains, the lines together to run to Kentville. And so the federal and provincial governments paid $6,800 $6,800 per mile for the 14 miles from Centerville to Weston. So this is a map of the railway that shows you where it ran through. And last night we took a little drive up to the west and looped back and forth over every road that crossed, where the railway crossed, just to see. I wanted to see if I could see where the Y was out in Weston, where they used to turn the train around, but there's no, you can't really see any of it. I can see where the railway went across the road, and that's about it. But, one of these pictures that I'm going to show you, you might see that later. This narrows it down a little bit more to show you where the line runs. I don't know if you can see what it says or not, but you see the various, where it goes through Milltown and Lakeville and Woodville, so on, up through Grafton and Somerset and out to Weston. And my original title for this was the memories of the North Mountain Rabbit. And the reason it was nicknamed the North Mountain Rabbit was because it made so many little short hops and jumps. So it was hopping along down the line, because all these stations and apple warehouses and so on were all just a few miles apart, so they were not very long runs. So this shows, this picture here, I'm not sure where this was taken, but that sort of a ghostly looking picture on the left-hand side makes me think it might be out in Weston, near where the Y was put. Because that looks like the old school that stands there still. It's a house now, but when I was a kid it was still a school. And you can see the cars that they use for hauling the ballast that would have gone on the right of way. And two locomotives, they look like they must be oil burners because they got these tanks that are sitting over top of the boiler there. So anyway, and there's station house under construction there. They were all built the same from one end to the other. And they housed section foreman and his family, their families, if they had any. And this picture here was taken in Woodville, near the Woodville, where the Apple warehouses were located. This is 1913, it says. They made a trestle out of wood and whatever they could find at hand, I would say, with lots of things. And then built a culvert underneath. Now this picture doesn't look like the culvert is under construction yet. Somewhere in my pile of junk I've got a picture that shows one of the sluices where they mixed the cement and then sluiced it down into the forms down below. And then they filled this all in with dirt. And so they ran cars along on the top, or dump carts, and dumped it down in there. And that trestle works, so it's buried inside the structure. It's all made of dirt. And there was gravel on the top. And years ago, when I was a kid, my cousin and I were trying to catch the train, because that was one of our favorite things. We heard the train coming, we'd run across through the orchard and over to the railway line. And when the train went by, we would take off on the run after it, try to catch up with them, because they were always traveling really slow. So we were never successful, of course. But anyway, on one of these days, we were ripping along, and just at the end of this culvert, we were, the crossing over the meadow, my cousin stepped in a hole, and out came a bunch of hornets, and he was under attack. So later on, we went back to have a look, and it was looked like a piece of wood that had rotten down inside and went way down in the ground. And so I expect it was part of one of these trestle works that was in there. That was part of our summer activities, was to chase the train, you know. That was always quite a lot of fun. And of course, usually there was a guy on the caboose stand there laughing at us as we were trying to catch up with him. And the other thing that we did, of course, was to put pennies on the tracks and get them squished nice and flat by a steam locomotive and the cars that followed behind. And when I was young, they were traveling in the summertime probably once a week, and you never knew when exactly, because you just hear the train whistle blowing and you'd keep a watch for it. They would haul every kind of thing you could think of. Oh, here's this is the typical culvert that they built with, I think this one, this is 1913. The one that's near my house is 1914, I think, so it was a year later. So this must have been made late in the year, probably. And in the corner, you see the picture of some of my relatives and some ladies, I think, too. I think your grandmother's there.
Oh.
My Aunt Margaret on the end, I think.
Yes.
And, I'm not sure exactly who else is there. My father's the third one in, I think, from the end. Anyway, they're all sitting there, get the picture taken. But that was one of the things they did, and I did with my friends and my brothers and sisters. We would love to go down there and run up and down through that culvert in the summertime, because it was nice and cool in there, and nice water running through, so it was kind of a neat spot, and it echoed really nicely. So this is showing some of the crew that were that worked on the railroad. This is just as it was being finished. Probably the first train that ran through there, probably. So this scene is showing the work that was required to get a locomotive through the snowdrifts. And a lot of these, like right on our farm, there was a big cut because they came across open fields and got undulated, so they had that all made up as a there's a raised bed, and then all of a sudden you came across the meadow, and all of a sudden you ran into a hill, so that had to have a ditch dug through for the rail to go through. So those kind of places would load up with snow like you wouldn't believe. And so this shows some guys digging snow out. So the guys at the bottom are shoveling it up on a level, and somebody else is shoveling it up to the next guy, and the next guy throws it over the top of the bank. And so when I was in high school, arrived home one soggy winter day, it was mushy snow floating around, and we had a big snowstorm the night before, and the snow was quite soft and sticky. And when I got off the bus, I could see this curl of steam coming up from the cupping back there. So I had a little snack, and then I went back to see what was going on, because it was still there after a few minutes, and so I thought I'll go see what's going on. So there was a bunch of guys doing this exactly what's shown in this picture. They were shoveling the snow. The plow was buried in the snow. And so they got it dug out and still couldn't back it up because there was a lot of snow jammed underneath, so they had to dig quite a bit more. They were able to move it back a little bit further, and they ran it in again, and of course it just buried and was stuck solid. So they arranged to have another locomotive brought out, and they came out with another one and hooked onto it. So it was all afternoon until dark before they got it out of there. And so it was quite a project just to get those things out. So when you really buried a piece of machinery like that, it was a major project. And that day was one of those warm winter afternoons, so you just, it was just terrible. Hot and sweaty. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go forward. Here's another picture. You can see the plow there with the flat top on it there. And the guys up there that are helping to do the shoveling of snow. You can see some apple trees in the background. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that when this line was built, they ran a telegraph system in there. So all the way down the right of way, there was poles and wires to run the telegraph, but I don't think they were ever used as far as I know. And the other thing that was interesting, that my father said that when he was young, the telegraph line was still there. And on each side of the right-of-way, there was a page wire fence with posts all along, and at every crossing, there was a cedar post with a round knob on the top. So you could set a gate up there or whatever. But at every crossing, they had this really fancy newel posts at the end, or whatever you want to call it, and all the way along the line. This shows, this is Tory Lane warehouse, which is down 2 miles east of where I live. And there's horses and wagons with barrels. And the interesting thing in a way is that when I was first going to school, they were still picking apples in barrels. And I remember going with my dad to the warehouse in Woodville, which looked basically the same as that, or very similar. That's the North Mountain Fruit Company, but that was actually what eventually became the United Fruit Companies. And that's the one was at Woodville, I'm quite sure. Sure it looks like it to be. So I remember going to that place with my dad and with a load of barrels on the truck, and they're all new barrels, and new barrels are all, when they make barrels, they're scorched inside because they put them on a little stove like a thing to make the staves bend properly. And so when you got to that warehouse and went inside, you could smell this aroma of apples and smoked wood. It was the most interesting smell, and it was just magic. It was such, and the really fun part was to watch these young fellows that were working there, because they would grab a barrel and have moved on. So you see quite a few pictures that you'll see later here somewhere, shows them with apples sticking up on the top of the barrel. And when they were ready to go to the warehouse, they were capped at both ends with So they would just grab these barrels and run. They would wear running shoes, and they would just run with the fingertips this year, and run down through the warehouse with these things and around the corner. And then there was a couple guys there stacking them up. And it was quite fascinating to see an apple warehouse being how they're being packed. This is was taken at the Burgess warehouse in Woodville. It was 1920. And a boxcar would hold 300 barrels of apples, so the idea was to pack one of these as fast as you can. They had insulated cars they would haul in the winter, haul them within the winter time, so they wouldn't freeze. But this guy in the foreground here is what his job was. What they called he was a facer. What he did was they finished packing the apples in there of a certain size, then he would shake the apple barrel a little bit to get them to settle down. And then his job was to place the last layer of apples in there so that they were as even as possible. And then you see the guy right behind him there on the side there with the white shirt. He's got a gadget with a screw thing. So that clamps on top of the barrel. They put the head in there, matched all up, and then he would screw that thing around and push it down, and it would latch into the chine in the barrel. And then it was sealed up and then stenciled. You can see the stenciled barrel right in the foreground there. So that's what these guys are doing. They're packing apples. There's another facer over here on the. This guy here is doing the same thing. He's got a basket of apples you see there to sort of finish it up with. So this is one of the warehouses or station that was in Woodville in 1970. And not too long after, I think it was torn down and maybe it burnt down. I can't remember what happened to it. Long gone. There's a little tiny shed that stands there now in the same spot, basically. But it's so when I was a kid, that was still a busy spot, more or less. And they had these little hand carts. When I was around, of course, they were gasoline powered. These little trolleys that would run up and down when they were doing the maintenance work on the line. But in my grandfather's day, they were hand powered. So they had pump handles on one guy on each end, and they would pump this thing, and away they'd go. So my grandfather and a bunch of guys were going back to the orchard one day, and went down into this little dip on our farm there. We could go across the railway, and all of a sudden they heard this screaming and yelling. Good thing it was in the summertime because they had the windows down. And he glanced over and he saw this cart coming toward him. These guys standing on these things, trying to get this thing slowed down because they didn't have any proper brakes on this pickup. And he had 2 or 3 rails on this thing, these steel rails staying on it, like spears coming right toward the side of his car. So we dropped on the throttle and scooted out of the way. They went whizzing by just inches away from the end of his car. So that was some of the hazards of rail business in the old days. I think it's always that way anyway. This is Lakeville. And you see the station and those warehouses were all, brand new once the railway went in. That was the big, one of the big things earlier was before they put that rail line in was that if you were growing apples over in the north side of the valley, you had to move all your apples over to, like in our case, it would be Cambridge or Waterville, and almost anywhere along the North Mountain, you would have to travel to the main line because that's where the warehouses and packing rooms were. So once this railway went in, that changed everything. There's more pictures of showing the rail line with one of the crosses of the station there in the upper picture, the apple warehouse, and there's a whole bunch of apples that must have just come out of the orchard stacked up there. What they would do was go along and level those barrels up and shuffle the apples down in there, and to store them, they would put a cap, the lid on them and store them away, and then they would pop that off and they would pack it in. It's quite a procedure. This was the other stuff, was that a lot of other kinds of stuff when we're traveling in and out on the train. So my grandfather was a doctor. And this is one of the boxes that he got some of his supplies in. In those days, I think it was various kinds of alcoholic potions with various herbs and vitamins in them that they would dole out to people. Being the country doctors, they didn't have a lot of medicine to work with, I don't think, back in those days, in the early days anyway. So my dad, when he was a little guy, had a wagon, and they lived only about, maybe half a mile away from the station. So my grandfather would say, "Fred, can you take your wagon over and meet the train?" He said they're bringing out a crate of stuff, and you can bring it back up here for me. So he would go over with his little wagon, go cross country through the orchards and stuff. And they would put it on his little wagon and would haul it back home. And my grandfather would stoke up his surgery with that. So this one says, President's Quarter and that's Cambridge Station. That part of the world was still called, the postal thing is still Cambridge Station, I think. So, yeah. And there was a post office in Cambridge, and that was right on the main line, of course. And I remember seeing that in operation one day because the post office guy would come out and he had a little crane that stuck out, put a hanging bag of stuff on it, and the crane would slow down and they'd reach up with a hook and pull that off and fish it into the car. And if they had anything to leave, they would pop it on there because it would just go really slow, and or they would throw it on the ground, I think, actually. But and away they would go. So this picture here is this is taken in 1931, and from up in the sky, one of my favorite spots. And it shows that this is where Bose's Yupik is. That's Bose's farm. Back when I was a kid, it was the people's name that operated that. But anyway, that shows you some of the orchard there. You can see the apple warehouses in the background there, just before you get to the mountain, more or less. There was one on the. This is the east side of the. Just looking north. That's the east side. Down in here is the. You can see the bit of the roofs there. It's of the United Fruit Company's warehouses. And all these places had part of that warehouses were set up as packing houses too. So when I was a kid, they were still packing out was to meet the band there, and there would be cars sitting outside there getting loaded up, and they would come in and haul them away. One day I was down there, and the steam engine was sitting waiting for the last barrel to be put on one of these cars. And the engineer was sitting there half asleep, and there was snow up to here on us, because we were, this tall by then. And so we thought, oh, we'll wake him up. So we got some snowballs, started throwing them in the cab, because the window was open on the side. So one of the guys that was really good with the snowball, they fling one in there and hit the whistle cord, and it flew all over the place. And so I saw him look at us with this, and he reached over and he pulled the lever or something. Anyway, and this great big gun of steam came out from between the two wheels, just this great cloud from great towards us. And of course, we were in complete panic trying to get away from it. And that was the fun of steam railway. And of course, the other thing we used to do, which is really not good, we used to get up on the cars and turn the brake off, just mechanical brakes on the things from when they were parked. See if they would move a little bit. Of course, they had the gadget to place them with. There was a little gadget with a shoe and a wooden handle on it. You slide that under take the brake off, and then you wanted to move the car a little bit to set it where you needed it. You could pump it along by sliding this thing underneath, and you push the handle down, and it would push the thing ahead a little bit. And I've actually used those later on when we had rail cars at Scotia Gold, and I worked there one winter and had to move cars. Anyway, that was how I learned all about railroad cars and how they worked.
Yeah. Oh my God.
doing things we shouldn't have. So, this is the other thing that when the train was first run through there, they had this big expedition, so they took everybody on that wanted to go. They could just get on the train and they ran into Kentville. And then later on, they had one of these that took them down, and they joined on switched over and went out to Kingsport to the beach. Everybody had a day out at Kingsport and back, so from all up and down the line. And occasionally here referred to as the Blueberry Express, but I think the Blueberry Express actually came from the line that ran across from over through Littleton and up to Margarettsville. That was really slow, and they used to stop and people would pick blueberries. There's a lot of blueberry country out there. Along the North Mountain line, there was probably some, but I don't know whether they did that too much. Father did. When you got to grade 10, you wanted to go to grade 11 and 12, you had to go to KCA in Kentville from our neighborhood. So they would get on the train in the morning and puff their way out of Kentville, jump off the train, run up to the school, spend the day. As soon as school was out, they'd rush back down to the train station, and then they would go back out to Weston. And they had in the wintertime, there was a car with a little pot-bellied stove in the middle, and they'd sit there and watch the countryside go by, or read, or whatever, or tell stories, and that's how they went to school. Way more exciting than driving on the bus, I would think. So, as time went on, there get to be less and less need for it because the roads are improving, and the market in Britain was going in the toilet because they was at the end of the war sort of thing, and so a lot of apple orchards were taken out back in the late 40s and early 50s, and so they were running these trains less and less, and the last bit they were running diesel, but one of the very last ones they made was actually with a steam engine, and it was 2 or 3 of us was in, I think in the early spring maybe, or we were up on top of the gravel pit there in actual Woodville, and we've been fishing in a little stream that ran up by there, and we went up there and made this little fire and went down over the valley, and then we heard the train coming, puffing along, and it had a whole string of cars on the back, and they stopped in Woodville and spent quite a few minutes there chugging around, moving cars, and then they went on down with more cars. We had about 10 or 12 cars on by the time they left Woodville, and picking up all the empty cars that were hanging around because it was getting toward the tail end of the whole thing. So this is a picture I took back in early March, late February. And you can see this is part of my farm right there in the foreground. That's their shed. They used to be back in here in the chunk of land, but I moved in there quite a few years ago. That's my oldest son's house. This is the house I grew up in. This is a house that we own for temporary workers. This is the rail line going here. This is the house that Lynn grew up in. You can't
Right
just
there?
really see it very well, but that's it right there.
Yeah.
And that's my house right there and my next door neighbor. So, so that's where the line ran through and goes across the brook right here. And then it was sort of built up and so on, and then crossed over the 221 right there.
It's so nice.
And this is another picture showing basically from the other direction. That's my house there. That's my soon-to-be flown off of airstrip there. I hope.
Wow.
That's the where everybody culvert. This is now a dam, and this is a pond for irrigation for land back in here. And now belongs to Frank's. And that's my son's place, and that's the house that I grew up in there. So that's gives you an idea of how the railway ran.
Yeah, this is part of the rail line right there. You can see it actually even in the snow here. And it's all plowed up and everything, but you can still see the mark that it leaves. It's right across there.
So this is what it looks like now. This is prior to requirement. We use that as a roadway to go across the meadow, and culverts, like I say, it's a dam now. It recently improved. It's actually just this spring they did some major improvements to the dam to make it work better for clear use. And so we travel across there on a regular basis all the time. And you can walk back and forth from one side to the other. It's great. And the other one, there's, oh, sorry. I guess that's the story.
That's the end of the story.
The other place where there's a dam is down in Milltown. That was made into a dam almost immediately after in fact, maybe before they shut the railway down. I'm not sure, but it was definitely done right away afterward, made into a dam. And this one wasn't until I sold it to the main part of the farm years ago. And anyway, that's a little bit of a history of the North Mountain Railway. And how it was used and why it was there. So, thank you.
Any questions?